Welcome to the Resilience Report, where each week we share the latest on companies engaging in inspirational solutions for our planet and engage with ecopreneurs and lighthouse leaders disrupting the respective industries in pursuit of better, more resilient business. I'm your host, Lauren Scott. Thank you for joining me as we dive into this week's report. This episode of the Resilience Report is really a special one for me. I met Chantal Beaudoin over 15 years ago when we were both studying at university here in Montreal. And Chantal was absolutely one of the first people I met that was combining the idea of business and commerce with sustainability. It was through our conversations that I was really able to successfully set out on my own path of trying to discover how these worlds can intersect. And in seeing how she has moved through various industries since then has been really inspiring. So who is Chantal? In her own words, with climate change as the biggest environmental crisis of our time, Chantal has designed solutions to activate sustainability across the globe. She has implemented projects with momentous impact, tracking CO2 equivalents, benefits to people and communities, along with cost savings as key success metrics. Over 15 years of experience building and delivering large-scale sustainability strategies, Chantal has experience in the real estate, hospitality, and higher education sectors. Chantal's resume is quite remarkable and includes highlights such as having launched the world's first whole life net zero carbon hotel, as well as overseeing packaging and recycling, as well as SBTi climate goals for McDonald's UK, just to name a few. And now over to our episode. Welcome, Chantal, to the Resilience Report. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. So great to be part of this.
So to start things off, can you provide our audience a little bit of context as to who you are and what you do?
I'm originally from Montreal, Canada, Quebec, but now living in London, UK. I've worked in sustainability/ESG for the past 20 years. That has meant working across different sectors and countries, from higher education to fast food, and now in real estate, both across the UK and Canada. I am now working for Knight Frank Investment Management as the head of ESG, where I'm looking after the strategy and implementation of sustainability across 300 buildings in the UK.
You mentioned it's been 20 years now that you've been working in sustainability. The topic, especially ESG, is top of mind for so many companies right now, but it hasn't always been the case. How has your journey progressed over the past couple of decades?
So I was studying in a Bachelor's of Commerce at the University of Concordia, and I had never heard about sustainability. This was back in the 2000s. And I was introduced to what was referred to the egg of sustainability, where you see the interconnection of the environment within the society, within the economy, and how they interlapse and interconnect. Through a class project, I actually got involved in the first campus sustainability assessment. Some of my recommendations were adopted by the management, by the university and management, and I think that was the spark for me to empower my career in sustainability and really get to see how environmental impact can have financial benefit impact and social impact that really contribute to people and the planet and business together.
Amazing. And it's pretty remarkable because not every student is thinking about sustainability. In fact, they're thinking more about their next exam or even what the latest bar is that just opened in the neighborhood. So it's very unique. What was it that got you interested at such a young age in terms of sustainability?
I credit my career in ESG to two women, Melissa Garcia Lamarca and Geneva Guérin. They came into one of my business class and presented this egg of sustainability and gave the students the opportunity to work on the first campus sustainability assessment. they had received $25,000 Canadian dollars in 2003 to produce this assessment. And they were working with the university management and professors to recruit over 100 students to work on this project. And I was one of those students. And really that project that enabled me to get involved in sustainability and start seeing my powers of change and my ability to create change, positive change within my campus, and then which became my career.
It is an interesting transition too, because you started in higher education, your professional career in higher education. Did you already know then or foresee that you would transition over to the the private sector?
So I've always loved working in universities because that's where innovation can happen. There's this energy of the students that really kind of want to make a change. It's the ripe environment to create different sustainability impact. And I stayed in higher education for over 14 years. So after Concordia, I went to the UK and worked in different universities here. And it was only kind of after one of my contract ended where I kind of thought, okay, I've worked in here and I'm getting older, and my kind of energy shifted. And I would say that I wanted to start kind of moving into the business sector, which was my undergraduate degree. But it was really challenging. I spent over 6 months applying for roles and being rejected and being told that my experience in the higher education didn't translate to the business sector. So it was hard to be taken seriously in the business world. But McDonald's was the first to give me that opportunity and to work on, take the work that I had done in terms of waste and recycling and climate and put that into the restaurants here in the UK. And to be completely honest, I was really ashamed of that move. It took me over 6 months to even post on LinkedIn or announce it to my network. It felt like I was perhaps going into the dark side. And actually, it really took me to, be embedded in the role in where I was part of the supply chain team to debunk all of the myth that we hear about McDonald's and understand and be proud of actually the standards that the UK McDonald's were adopting, being the biggest organic milk purchaser, only serving free range eggs, using the red tractor standards for their bacon, and understanding the relationships that the business had created with small and medium and big suppliers, and those relationships spanning over 20 years, making the supply chain a really quality and resilient one.
That's amazing. And I'm sure that wasn't always easy. However, I think even with the best intentions with companies, sometimes it's hard for those of us in sustainability roles to move the ESG story or narrative forward within the organization. And it can often involve really challenging or hard conversations. Can you maybe share some of those conversations that you've had to have over the years?
My work is all about difficult conversations because it's all about creating change, and no one really likes change. And I'm a disruptor. Think about our personal changes, and it could be ending a bad relationship or something small like changing an element in your diet or starting to exercise. In my role, I'm asking people to change the way they do things, often behaviors that they've done for many, many years and never thought or wanted to do anything differently. I'm also asking people to do more with the same amount of resources, either money or time. And it can be frustrating for these individuals. And sustainability requires innovation, things that perhaps have never been done before, and there's a risk it can fail. And nobody likes to fail or take risks, or it's not our natural tendencies. the conversations that I've often had to have, and every role and every project have required difficult conversation. People are saying, well, let others do it first. Let's see what. Let's not be the first, because let's learn from others. And so my role is to make that change easy and to empower people, either by giving the choices or having them think that it's their idea, or making the change happen via understanding their work priorities and aligning the idea and change to what they have to produce or perform on. If I look back at some key projects, going back to Concordia University, when I did my campus plan, one of the recommendations was to put solar on the new upcoming engineering building. And we met with the architect, and he was really against it. He was saying that solar had not been proven in Quebec, with the temperatures ranging to, going to minus many degrees. And I was in that meeting with Geneva, who was heading the project, and it was my first conflict conversation, and I was a student at the time, and proposing these solar panels. And the conversation was, well, it's being done in Europe, and it's being done in countries that have similar temperatures as Quebec, and it is possible. And let's take that risk, because this is what we need to be doing. And in that case, it wasn't successful. He didn't want to take the chance on solar. However, through the conversation and through other recommendations, we adopt different measures. So, for example, Concordia used interface carpets as a result of that conversation. Also used low carbon cement, using fly ash cement. And so, what was a difficult conversation, because you kind of want all of your recommendations to be adopted, led to a conversation of, well, what's possible and where can we start? And we definitely got there in some instances. And then if I think about, again, moving to another university, McEwen had announced a LEED certification. And at the time when the building was announced, it was going to be a LEED certification of excellence. And when the project started to be developed, it was found that it was going to take $1 million more to implement some of the measures that the building had announced it was going to be. And so again, a really difficult conversation where we're not going to meet the standard that we've publicly announced. And, in a sense, the university stance was, well, who's going to know? We're going to be a level less than excellence, and that's going to be good enough. And what are we going to compromise? And again, it's this difficult conversation of saying, well, actually, we've announced it publicly. Our funding is linked to this standard, and it's something that we'll need to be reporting if we don't reach that target. And almost in a light threatened way, saying, it's going to come out, and $1 million, we can find it in different efficiencies elsewhere, and let's put our brains together to make it happen. And they did. So what was kind of going to be a maybe became a reality, which was great in terms of having that conversation and using a little bit of force in making that change happen. I then went to the London School of Economics, another university here in the UK. And we were doing a project called Bin the Bin, which is about removing individual desk bins and replacing by communal recycling bins. The pilot started with, overnight in one department, we removed, it was actually the legal department of the LSE, and we removed the bins overnight with the help of the cleaners. And the benefit there was that, instead of having all these waste bins and plastic bags, we would remove them, and these central recycling bins had food waste, had mixed recycling, really had this central place of waste sorting. And when the morning that we started, and everybody got a little pamphlet explaining the project, and had received information prior to the change happening, but the emails that flowed that morning of professors saying that this was an attack on human rights, and that they demanded their bins back, and that we had no right to remove it into their office, and it was their property. So going to that departmental meeting was extremely difficult, and people being upset with their space, their things being touched and being taken. What transpired, and because it was a pilot and we had done it only in one department, was that the strategy to implement the rest of the campus completely changed afterwards, where what we did in subsequent implementation was go to a departmental meeting, explain the project, and give a choice where occupants could either keep their bins, but they would not get a plastic bag and it would not be emptied by the cleaners, or donate their bin, and their bin would be going to organizations in need. And we did a little video for each of the departments where we said, okay, this is your chance to donate your bin. And at first, people were kind of not sure, but once the first person kind of got their bin and brought it to this central place, and then all these different bins kind of collated, and then we took this picture that, that each department could say, this is how many bins we donated to and participated in. And it was great because people were empowered by that change. They saw the benefit. They decided, to keep their bins in some instances, where they said, okay, well, I'll use my bin and then use that to sort into the main recycling. And we reached 90% diversion from landfill, from waste through that. And that was implemented throughout the LSE and halls of residence afterwards. So that difficult conversation and understanding how people felt led to a change in that kind of project implementation, which led to the successful deployment afterwards.
That's amazing. So many different examples, and I think it's important to be able to show what works and what doesn't work, and then kind of how you have to find an alternative route sometimes as to finding a solution that will work for the broader crowd.
That's it. Coming into McDonald's and my role, one of the things I was really passionate about was reusable cups, and introducing that. And when I first started, my line manager, the director of supply chain, said, don't waste your time on reusable cups. The business is not ready, and it's just not a reality. And I was even told, don't compromise your reputation by even talking about reusable cups. And I don't do very well when people say not to do something. So I went ahead and talked about reusable cups. And the answer was, as I planned, it's not possible. We serve our customers in less than 60 seconds or whatever target it is. We have a standard of quality in our kitchen. So imagine taking a dirty cup through back to the kitchen where everything is sanitized, and bringing it back to the customers, like logistically, operationally, financially, it really didn't add up. And I stayed over 3 years at McDonald's, and I through the years implemented different projects like the paper straws and different plastic reduction measures in the packaging, and different measures. But that one was I kept on, from day one, I kept on talking about it. And it took those 3 years of conversations and actually thinking, okay, we're the biggest business, fast food business. How can we make this possible? And empowering the people in operation and IT to come together and finding a solution. And in the end, what transpired was a reuse program that was based on reusable cups that were already in the business, and that was through a deposit system. So how it would work is you order your coffee, you add a £1 to £5, whatever the cost is for the reusable part of your cup. Then a reusable cup gets deployed at the kitchen, so a clean cup gets used. There's a ticket system that identifies the cup to know which one it is, and then gives it to the customer. Now, when the customer gives it back, it's through a central depot area. So again, in the restaurant area, where you'd deposit back your cup and then get your refund. So that got into and is now being trialed within the McDonald's restaurants here in the UK. So it took 3 years of difficult no's, difficult conversations, people saying it's not possible, and standing ground of, well, we need to make this happen. We need to find a solution, and then finding a solution, working together, and empowering everybody in that process to do so.
That's incredible. And it must have felt amazing to at least see the pilot start to be rolled out, and to then be able to see what works, what's not working, and then kind of continue to iterate from there.
Yeah, I think seeing change being trialed and failing, it might be the type of stickers that were too sticking, so they were hard to clean, all the way to what's the deposit amount that's the right one to apply, all the way to the type of cup that we're going to use, and the reusable cup made out of coffee cup that we selected from a supplier that was UK based, and using recycled cups, paper cups, to make plastic reusable cups, and really doing it well, and obviously having that opportunity with doing it well through our IT system, so that it's seamless and everything is thought of in terms of customer journey. And
Right.
it's everything that happens behind the scene that people don't necessarily see. They might get frustrated, the customer might get frustrated from their initial experience, and it's that feedback that then fuels the reiteration and improvement of that solution.
That's amazing, and such an exciting project. You mentioned at the top of the call that you're currently now working in real estate. Are you working on any specific projects in particular that you're really excited about?
Right now, for us, there's a black hole, and this is a reality for a lot of the landlords that have buildings and have tenants. And that black hole is in terms of the building energy consumption. So if you think about the different buildings, we have supermarkets, hotels, warehouses, manufacturers, and we own the building, but then we rent out for 20, 30-year leases to various businesses. And so in some cases, we might have landlord consumption data, and that's the case with offices where you might have communal spaces or external parking that's controlled by the landlord. But most of the consumption, 99% of the consumption, is through the tenants and the different spaces that they occupy. And right now, there's no legal obligation for tenants to share that data. And so when I started in the role, one of the very first thing before I can even draft a net zero plan or looking at where we can impact, it's understanding our baseline. And this black hole is that kind of big project that I'm working on. And there's different ways to go about in collecting data, and we're piloting this measure that gets the data directly from the grid. But we need tenant consent, which is the biggest challenge. And right now, those difficult conversations are businesses that are hiding behind corporate policy, confidentiality. Even those big businesses that have public net zero targets are coming back and declining to give consent. So it's really one conversation at a time for them to understand our objective and also the benefit that they're going to gain from giving us the consent, because we're also going to make their consumption available through a portal, which means that when we first get the baseline and then do initiatives to reduce the consumption, be it solar, energy efficiency, LEDs, or any other measures that they or we do, we can then track on a real-time basis what that consumption is producing. So these business cases of energy reduction measures then become easy to track, and we make sure that we're doing it efficiency and with transparency. So I'm excited because it's kind of the baseline that we need to do to start anything, be it net zero or energy reduction. I think, and this is using technology, and there's different risks on different levels in terms of acquiring this data. But once we have it, it's going to be gold. I think the next project that I'm excited about, we're piloting an AI system that is a hardware that links that tracks the building management system. So building management systems are basically a centralized hardware that controls when your energy comes on, when you're heating or cooling. It looks at all of it can link everything in your building and manage it. And right now, this hardware that we're piloting is tracking for a 2-month period how the BMS, building management system, is operating, and then looking at how it can optimize. For example, if the weather is going to be hotter the next day or cooler, the way the building heats or cool might change, and that might create efficiencies. So this whole technology, AI technology, is all about no CapEx required and no behavior change. It's really working to make how the building operates more efficiently. And if it's successful, we're estimating it could create 10 to 30% reduction. So we're in that pilot stage. We're using 3 of our buildings, and we'll be reporting by the end of January how the pilot and how the energy consumption has been changed by the measures. So again, it's something that we're trialing, and we're working with a startup company, and really excited to see if technology can really create that kind of energy reduction and help us in our net zero journey. Lastly, I think the biggest potential right now is solar. It's a win-win, especially with energy prices fueling the business case. just 2 years ago, you would have a 12-year plus payback for solar, and now you're looking at 7 or 8. We're as a landlord offering to pay for the capital investment, and then the tenants purchase the energy, which is 30 to 50% more cost effective per kilowatt hour. So, but again, there's difficult conversations in that, because you're utilizing roof and you're having legal conversations around what happens if although solar is great for roof protection and doesn't have any, there's still a risk that if you have roof damage, who pays for it, and what happens during that time where you're not producing energy. And so those difficult conversations are happening on the legal standpoint, and reaching agreements where we're having to really work with each tenant and create confidence and create a kind of win-win situation where it's kind of a no-brainer that we need to be doing this, and we need to be doing it as soon as possible. And again, difficult conversations on the supply chain, because now it's working with suppliers and asking, where are you producing? Where is your silicone coming from? How are you auditing your supply chain? And what kind of standards do you have in place to avoid human rights violation, which is a big issue within the solar industry. So these are all things that are happening behind the scenes before any projects can be deployed.
So you mentioned having obviously done the transition from working in the North American market to working in Europe. What are the biggest differences, or even kind of some of the parallels that you see, but definitely those differences in terms of our approach to sustainability and ESG in those two very distinct markets?
So back in Canada, when I was doing change and sustainability, I was using the heart as a way to motivate, and that might be future generation, and doing the right thing for our planet and people. And obviously linking the business case was also a driver in terms of finding financial incentives, and those remain valid for both the UK and Canada. But the main difference that I saw with working in the UK was in terms of legislation, and the legislation driving the change. Here in the UK, we have the TCFD, the Task Force for Climate Financial Disclosure, which means that starting in April 2023, large businesses will need to report on a carbon footprint with their financial disclosure. And there's a different set of recommendations for those businesses, but the plan is to start with large businesses, but the whole economy will be impacted by this. So companies can no longer hide behind commitments on net zero or carbon reduction. This will now be linked to their audited financial disclosures. And the other regulation is called MEES. It's around energy efficiency. And what that means for landlords is that, again, in this year, in April 2023, any building that is below a E level of performance, so we have A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So anything that is F and G, you will not be allowed to gain income from those properties. And the target is, and this is now in a consultation, and there's a white paper by the government, but the idea is that by 2030, you won't be able to, the same requirement will apply for up to B level. So, So by 2023, if your buildings are not a minimum of B, you will not be able to generate income and rental income from those properties. So this is a huge incentive in terms of in terms of getting our buildings and having the landlord responsible for improving the efficiency and getting the right certificate to be able to let the rent the asset. And then finally, the Climate Act. The UK has adopted 2050 as its net zero target, and this means that businesses will need to also be net zero by 2050 or sooner. And for us as a real estate business, what that means is the potential threat for assets becoming stranded. And what I mean by that is there's a cost to get to net zero for a building to reach climate targets. And right now, when you're buying or selling a building, the energy efficiency is not quantified in the value of the building. But what we're now anticipating with this Climate Act is this transitional risk where buildings will have a brown discount, this kind of decrease in value if the investment required is larger than the asset value itself. So what that means is we need to work on retrofitting our buildings and future-proofing them so that the value is maintained across time, because we're holding assets for a long period of time, and we're seeing how the energy efficiency is now starting to be included in purchase decision making, and that's only going to be fueled as time progresses, where companies realize this risk of devaluation of assets if the building is not performing as it should be, because then the investment for the person buying it will be too high, where they'll need to make that investment to meet the legislation. In London, another planning requirement is now BREEAM certification. So it's again, you can't build a new building if you're not BREEAM. And what that means is, some people might say it's a tick box exercise, but it really does make you look at your energy efficiency, your biodiversity impact, your waste management, your transport, your impact on the community. And going through the BREEAM process just transforms the way you're developing buildings, and is also an opportunity to look at your impact and review opportunities that you might have of, realizing you're in a drought area or a flood area, and implementing a blue roof that captures rainwater, and those conversations happening and those opportunities being explored fully, and generating some really good innovation and some transformation in how we build new buildings. There's also now an operational carbon tax. So every building has to go through an analysis of its carbon footprint at design and pay a tax equivalent to £90 per ton, which is huge. And so this is driving efficiencies, because instead of paying £1 million in carbon tax to the council, well, you're going to put that into energy efficiency measures and improve the building value, improve its performance, and it's kind of a win-win all around. So these legislative and financial requirements are driving how we build and manage our assets.
It's amazing to see all of that going on, and certainly inspiring for this side of the pond. I know sometimes, especially for those of us working in sustainability, we're so bombarded with the reality of what is happening with the planet right now and the climate crisis. And I'm curious if you have any resources to keep yourself motivated and inspired and engaged throughout this process. Are there any resources that you would recommend to listeners to check out?
I mean, I'm linked to different sustainability networks, And it's great on LinkedIn, these different groups that pop up, and depending on my, it could be energy efficiency, or it can be community building, or it can be, different parts of the E or the S or the G, and getting these examples of best practices, and business doing some really cool stuff. I found EDIE is a great resource for compiling these examples and breakthroughs in business and sustainability. But I also find my motivation from knowing the kind of the status of the world and where are we really at, and not kind of being blindsided by these greenwashing claims, and that can sometimes deter you from really realizing the urgency of where we're at. And a podcast that I really love is Radical Optimism. I think it's important to keep the fire alive of the urgency, but also linked to the solution. So the idea of being an optimist, that we can do this, but we need to be radical and change the way we're doing things. And I think this balance keeps the fire and the motivation alive to thrive towards change.
I'll definitely have to check those out. Certainly, you've been having all of these different conversations over the years. What are you seeing as one of the biggest barriers to change for businesses? And then is there something in particular, like a tool or a resource, or even just an approach that seems to be helping businesses overcome that barrier?
Well, in every sector has different issues. I think for real estate, what I'm seeing is this idea of embodied carbon. And embodied carbon means the carbon that is required for the production, manufacturing, transportation of materials. So when I'm building a new building, or if I'm doing a retrofit development, the materials and products that go into the building are currently not being quantified or reported on. So we can look at new buildings and saying, great, it's EPC A, it has, it uses solar, it uses ground source heat pump, it has all these kind of operational technology to reduce carbon. But what went inside the building or that development is not it's again a black hole. And when you start quantifying that, is usually 90% of your carbon, or even more, because it's such a large amount. It's everything that goes, the cement, the metal, the all the way to the furniture, to the furnishings, everything that the carbon, that footprint. And when you're looking at changing the way, getting that information, like what makes this couch better in terms of carbon versus this other couch, or this cement versus this alternative building material. Often it's not being quantified by these businesses. They need to be doing life cycle analysis to get the carbon impact. But B, when you're talking about a new building material, I was talking to a university here that is developing this alternative cement, and their biggest challenge is that to be deemed acceptable in building standards, you have to have tested and approved that material, because you don't want to have disasters where people's lives are at stake here. So if you're testing a new type of cement and the foundations aren't strong and people die, that's the worst case scenario that you can think of. So usually you'll need a 20 plus year testing, but we don't have that time. So how can you incentivize testing out new technologies and new materials in a safe manner? And that requires insurers, government, policymakers, developers, everybody kind of getting together and sharing the burden, i.e., okay, well, let's start on a one-story building, and let's start with infrastructure that don't require strong foundations, or thinking differently about how we can start introducing these new technologies, and getting the funding and consent to move forward with that, because we need to do things differently, and it needs to happen quite rapidly, and we don't have the 20-year span to wait to see if it works or not. The other thing that I'm seeing as ways businesses are tackling this embodied carbon is setting their own carbon budgets and allocating this shadow price, and making that shadow price part of their project performance and delivery. So each area of the business or project will be allocated a carbon budget, and that becomes a way to measure, track, and collaborate on initiatives and innovation. And so that is really kind of a good success stories because unless you're measuring it, you don't know where you're at, and you don't know how much impact you can make. And having budgets associated drives performance, and people want to make economies, and so if you're on a project and you have a certain carbon budget, and if you go over that, you'll be deducted, then that gives an incentives to really think differently and do projects differently. So you might decide to reuse a part of your building where perhaps you might not have, or you might go into reuse solutions, and which sometimes require more time and more coordination, but allow you to meet your carbon and financial budget. And I think it's those difficult conversations we were talking about, and empowering that change, that makes a difference.
So you spent the last 20 years now working in sustainability and the ESG side. And what would you recommend someone who wants to start implementing, whether it is the E, the S, or the G within their organization, and they just want to get started? What would you recommend that they do?
I think the first step is to understand your carbon footprint. And that might sound, I don't know where to start, but there's loads of free resources available to businesses. And that might be, okay, understanding your energy consumption, your waste, your water. But mostly what you'll find is that's only a small percentage of your carbon footprint, where the business's footprint is all in their supply chain. What are you buying? If you look at your P&L, your purchase and loss, and your capital goods, what are you buying? What are the different categories of items that is it services? Is it parts? Is it what are the elements of your supply chain? And then try to tackle that kind of 20%, the top 20% of your supply chain, and seeing what kind of criteria, what kind of tracking, and how can you influence your supply chain, because then they come into your whole life product. And then, because once you've understood your largest carbon footprint, you can create carbon reduction. And I would recommend looking at science-based carbon reduction, SBTi. There's a cost to be approved by the SBTi, but their tools are free on the web, so you can download their Excel spreadsheet, put in your data, and see the reduction pathway you need to follow. And then you can go ahead and create a plan based on where your biggest impact lies. And then how you create that impact is through the engagement of your staff. And that might be through, the biggest benefit, or the biggest way to do that is through linking on bonus and promotion. So having direct ESG performance measures that that drive the bonus and promotion will create a culture change for ESG. And then lastly, I would say to promote your successes, but mostly your failures. If we start talking about the things that work and doesn't work, then everybody can benefit and we can get there faster.
That's amazing. And we always ask the same last question, but what do you think it will take for businesses and leaders to be resilient going forward?
Businesses need to build cultures, their business cultures, based on transparency, innovation, and collaboration. And these are like nice words, but if you reward these values and practices, then they get embedded in your company culture. So if you're rewarding people that fail and try to do things differently, or if you're able to communicate when your project has achieved or not achieved its objective, and when you're able to create win-win situations where collaboration thrives, then that builds resiliency. And then finally, I think in terms of what we talked about initially, understanding the climate impact of the supply chain. What will climate change have as an impact on your supply chain, and being prepared and building solutions and networks to protect it. So if your supply chain requires people to come to work and transportation is a big issue, or if you need a specific material part of your supply chain, or whatever it is, it's looking at being prepared with the worst climate change scenario, and assuming, right now our planet is 1.2 degrees warmer. We're trying to get to 1.5, and that's the target with the Paris Agreement. But what happens? What are the climate change impact on your supply chain if we reach 1.5, which is a best case scenario? And what happens to your supply chain at 2 degrees, 3 degrees, 4 degrees, which is a catastrophe? And businesses that will have plan B, C, or D, and be ready with those solutions or networks will be the ones that thrive and survive.
It's been amazing. You're such an inspiration, Chantal, in terms of your career trajectory over the past 2 decades. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. So good to be part of it.
I hope that you've enjoyed this week's edition of the Resilience Report. If you would like to hear and see more, be sure to check out @The Resilience Report on YouTube, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Until we connect again, remember, even on the darkest of days, we all have the opportunity to be a lighthouse for others as we collectively pursue better, more resilient business.